Welcome, everybody. I'm Raymond Sexton. I'm the chair of the Australia, New Zealand Engineers Ireland region. I'm very excited for this event because we've managed to pick a time where it makes sense in New Zealand, makes reasonable sense here in Australia, and also makes sense in Dublin. So essentially, I'm very excited and there's a couple of things I just want to say. I particularly want to thank David Quinn for pulling this together. He's the classic global Irish engineer, bit of a bright spark, but still loves the connection with the home. And anyone that's a migrant like myself or David, this is the essence of why Engineers Ireland is so important to people overseas, because our former president, Mary McAleese, said that migrants march to the beat of two different drums. And if you're not a migrant, it's hard to understand that. So I'm very, very pleased that David's grabbed this issue, linked Australia, New Zealand, and his home place of Lough Neagh. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. So I'm going to hand over to you, David, and I'll only jump in if these guys start piling on top of you. Okay, go for it.
Good stuff, Raymond. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Really appreciate you all joining us today for this discussion on managing iconic landmarks. I'm really delighted to be moderating this one. As Raymond mentioned, it is a bit special for me. I grew up beside Lough Neagh, only a couple of minutes down the road in County Tyrone. So it's always been a place that's been part of who I am. And to be able to bring into this conversation Lough Neagh alongside the likes of Milford Sound and Uluru, it feels like we're bringing a little bit of that home into the international discussion. So the idea behind the session is that it's not going to be a heavy academic lecture. It's about sharing reflections and stories. And we're going to be looking at these landmarks, not like dots on a map, but as living places with ecological importance, cultural meaning, and the key thing really is those community connections. And what's interesting though is that even though these landmarks are, half a world apart, the challenges they face are surprisingly similar between water quality, tourism pressures, and climate impacts. So the real question is going to be, how do we protect what's precious and meaningful to us while still allowing people to connect with it? So we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers from across both hemispheres, and the format's going to be simple. We're going to have a few short talks, a little bit of discussion, and then, all being well, plenty of time for your questions. So as we go along, I encourage you to pop your questions into the Zoom Q&A function, and we'll keep an eye on them and bring as many of them as we can into the discussions towards the end. So with that, let's get underway and hear from our first speaker. So we have Dr. Sarah McGuckin, who's the head of natural science at Northern Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. So Sarah's going to share with us the department's perspective on the environmental, cultural and policy challenges that are facing Lough Neagh and some of the initiatives underway to protect and restore it. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to David initially for reaching out to take part in this morning's webinar this morning for us, potentially evening elsewhere. This is an issue also very close to my heart on Lough Neagh. But a loch that I live 5 miles away from, close enough to be within easy access, but also just about far enough away not to be tortured by Lough Neagh flies, although that's less of an issue these days. Just to give you a bit of background, again, my name's Sarah McGuckin, Head of Natural Science within the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, covering all aspects of nature conservation and biodiversity. So that just wanted an opportunity here and glad to have it to share our experience, but also to learn from others, because it looks like these are some common challenges. So here we have the image that we always like to consider of Lough Neagh. It is the largest lake in the UK and Ireland, and just to kind of give you a sense of its scale, from a Northern Ireland perspective, it's pretty significant. It is our largest protected site. It's about 392 square kilometres, right slap bang in the middle of Northern Ireland. And you'll see basically all of our roads just kind of circulate around it. You'll also see there from the catchment map that the catchment makes up about 40% of the land area of Northern Ireland. It's a quite intensive catchment, a lot of intensive agriculture, a lot of development. So it's under an awful lot of pressure, and also because it's draining such a significant part of Northern Ireland, that in itself is very challenging to manage. From my perspective, and again for many of the people of Northern Ireland, it's an incredibly important natural capital asset. It's an internationally important wetland ecosystem, and because of that, it has multiple designations offering it protection. You'll see there on the left that there's a very complex food web and ecosystem there that relies on balance. And for some time now, we have not had that balance within the lough ecosystem, within the body of the lough itself, and in the surrounding shoreline and catchment. Just in terms of its protections, way back in 1976, it was recognised as an internationally important wetland and designated as a Ramsar site. Following that, it was then designated as an area of special scientific interest, which is one of our local designations, or an ASSI as we call it. And then following that, it was also designated for its particularly important bird populations as a special protection area, or an SPA. You'll see there the lough ecosystem itself. It's protected for its aquatic birds, its shoreline habitats, breeding and wintering bird assemblages, and its very significant invertebrate and fish assemblages, all of which are under significant pressure, and most are in poor ecological condition. So there's a real risk that any additional pressures coming into the system, where the system is not resilient, you can get to that kind of tipping point scenario where things start to significantly collapse and deteriorate. And that's probably a position where we're at the minute. You'll also note there that it's an important site for pollen, which is a freshwater fish species native to Northern Ireland, which is only found in 5 lakes, but the most important population, which is commercially fished, is within Lough Neagh. So just in terms of those protections, that does mean that as having the highest level of protection, public bodies, people operating within the catchment in and around the lough must comply with environmental regulations and ensure that their activities do not have any adverse effect on the system itself. Our challenge is the size of the lough, the size of the catchment means that the cumulative impact of multiple pressures, it's extremely difficult to manage. And just to give you a bit of background here, it has been, I suppose, well known internationally as being eutrophic, declared eutrophic back in '94, and I think it was in the early 2000s it was declared hypertrophic. So there's been a lot of excess nutrients within it for a very long time. But again, that's all starting to build up within the bed of the lough as well. Other important uses, it's an incredibly important fishery resource, important to our very vibrant but worried shoreline community. It's an invaluable drinking water supply, so it supplies over 40% of Northern Ireland's water. Important for increasingly for recreational activities, which have now been in decline because of the pressures and because of what we now refer to as the blue-green algae crisis within Northern Ireland, or within Lough Neagh. It's actually not an algae, but a kind of ecological response to multiple pressures within the lough. So it's a kind of cyanobacteria which is causing the significant discoloration that you'll see there can be seen from space. And it's now really at this time of the year is covering most of the lough, has been making its way up the canal and the river band right up onto the north coast, with during the summer a number of beaches being closed because of the effects of this toxic algae. So while we do like to think of the other images we have of Lough Neagh, probably these are the most recent headlines in the last couple of weeks, which is quite soul destroying to see. But again, it's highlighting, I suppose, the tipping point and the crisis that we're dealing with within Lough Neagh. So there's not a lot of pressure, discussion within the Northern Ireland Assembly to ensure that sufficient measures are being taken across Northern Ireland departments and across all the sectors and the public to do what we can to reverse this trend. In terms of the pressures on the lough, you'll see there's a wide range there. As I said, excess nutrients, habitat fragmentation within the lough or within the catchment, which will in the past have been providing vital nature-based solutions and helping to suppose manage the pressures and runoff into the lough. Changes in agricultural practice and a move to more intensive agriculture. Climate change, the increased temperature is certainly playing a part. Resource exploitation, which is fishing and also sand extraction in a more limited basis going on within the lough. A whole range of recreational pressures, but I suppose the one that really come to fore is the increase in our invasive species. The zebra mussel, which has brought about this kind of perfect storm between excess nutrients, warmer temperatures. It's a shallow lough or lake, so it's increasing in temperature, and then the zebra mussel coming in and playing some havoc. We also have roach coming in there, having an impact on, I suppose, the fish and the ecosystem features as well. So in terms of the actions, there has been an awful lot of activity, a lot of concern. So our department has prepared, along with the Department of Infrastructure, a Lough Neagh report and Lough Neagh action plan, which was published last July. 36 actions across a range of pillars, but also is underpinned by strong science and governance, just to ensure that we are fully understanding what's going on within an already heavily modified natural system with multiple pressures. So that has included, or is including, really looking at how we enhance our regulation so that it's much more effective to address pollution sources, improving and building a robust and comprehensive research and monitoring programme, again, to understand those complex interrelationships between the blue-green algae and all the zooplankton, phytoplankton, and all the species that live within the lough. Because again, the blue-green algae cyanobacteria is an ecological response, which means we will need ecological solutions or consideration of them all. Key aspect of programmes going on at the minute is our review of the Nutrient Action Programme and controls for nutrients. Within the Northern Environment Agency ourselves, we're leading on the review of the Neagh Ban River Basin Management Plan, and my team's leading on the development of a conservation management plan for the Lough Neagh ASSI, Ramsar and SPA, really to, suppose, meet our obligations to restore the site to favourable conservation status and also rebuild ecosystem health and resilience, because there'll be many more pressures coming along as well. Catchment initiatives and engaging with stakeholders is key to this, because we need to bring all parts of the, I suppose, the Northern Ireland community together on this, and the important business sectors, just to make sure that we're finding that right mix of measures. So the pressure's on, the people are panicking, users are panicking, so we have to, I suppose, provide some reassurance that we are taking steps. They will take time. It has been decades in the making, but we have to make sure that we're bringing people with us, and so keen to learn from others how they've been tackling similar issues and problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So we'll move on quickly to Councillor Malachy Quinn. So he was probably one of the first people who came to mind whenever we started dreaming this up, because he has been a very vocal local advocate for the lough and its communities. So Malachy, I'll pass it off to you now.
Oh, thank you very much, David, and I'm delighted actually Sarah went first, because she's a lot better with the figures and the knowledge on it. So I will probably pale in comparison, no doubt. But To me, Lough Neagh is simply a picture. It's that big blue spot in the map of Ireland, but only if it's a big map. All of you have heard about it, but not many really think about it. It's that thing that you might see on a drive to somewhere else. But to me, Lough Neagh is home. It's that beautiful loch that has given us stories and fed our families for thousands of years. It's on the crest of local primary schools. It's on the badge of football clubs. It's the beating heart of the Lough Shore community, which I'm delighted to be part of. Last week, I was telling my daughter about when I was growing up. She told me what was it like in the olden days. I'm trying to let that go. I told her about the horror stories of the Lough Neagh flies. Swarms so thick they looked like clouds and tornadoes in the distance. You couldn't leave a window open at night with the light on, or your entire room would be covered with flies and would come alive. And then you'd spend the next hour, depending on what time you're home at, with the hoover trying to clear them all out. I remember playing football on summer evenings with the tornadoes of flies swirling around, sticking to the jerseys. And as we were riding our bikes down to the shore, we had to keep our heads down because if you looked up, you'd get your stomach full of them. And I remember the joy of diving into the black water from the ferry bridge. No fear, no hesitation, just complete freedom. And that was the loch that I grew up with. It wasn't always easy to live with it, but it was alive, it was healthy, and it was part of who I am and who we are. And now I look at it today, and the change is heartbreaking. 3 years ago, people living around the Lough Shore called me and said, Malachy, there's a strange smell. It smells like a gas leak. And it wasn't a one-off call. I literally fended at least 30 to 40 calls on the same day, as far away as Coll Island, where I'm the local town to myself, all telling me about this strange gassy smell. So we reported it, and soon there was two fire brigades set out. The smells were being reported from miles away, but it wasn't gas. It was the algae dying. At the washing bay, at the Battery Harbour, the water turned blue-green and thick, and the stench hanging in the air, a sight and a smell you can't quite shake once you've seen it. The effect, however, is longer lasting and possibly fatal. The glorious Lough Neagh fly is virtually gone. Once cursed as a nuisance, it was in fact a vital main food source for eels and fish. And for the first time in thousands of years, eel fishing is no longer happening. Not because of toxins, but because the eels are no longer growing large enough to be fished, because their food source isn't there. At the same time, we've discovered toxins building up in other fish from the loch, toxins in the very flesh that could end up on people's plates. The eel travels thousands of miles across the planet, across oceans to Lough Neagh. How many will be able to make a return trip? And all of that is happening in the very lake that provides 40% of Northern Ireland's drinking water. So where did it all go so wrong? It isn't a natural accident. It is a result of decades of failure. In the past, we had proper monitoring of the loch's health. We used to have a water testing. We had freshwater laboratory at Trad Point carrying out regular research and analysis. That lab was world class. Today, it sits idle, dust gathering on the benches while the water turns green outside its doors. If you want a picture of political neglect, it's the empty lab at Trad Point. Meanwhile, the pollution kept coming. Phosphorus is the main culprit, and the numbers tell a story. 62% of phosphorus loading from agriculture, 24% from outdated wastewater treatment, and 12% from leaking septic tanks. Experts estimate that in just 1 year, an additional 16,000 tonne of phosphorus entered the loch, with around 10,000 retained in the water itself. The result is that Lough Neagh is now classified as hyper-eutrophic, one of the most nutrient-rich lakes anywhere in the world, the perfect breeding ground for recurring toxic blooms. And in 2025 alone, there were 139 recorded detections of these blooms, more than 3 times the number from the year before. Climate change and invasive species are making matters worse. Zebra mussels filter out harmless algae, giving harmful blooms free rein to dominate. They make the water look deceptively clear, while letting more sunlight hit the Lough Neagh bed, fueling the blooms further. Fishermen told me that years ago you could not see into Lough Neagh. You put your hand down, it would almost disappear. Now you can see straight down to the bottom. And how do we combat something so small and plentiful? Well, an expert told me that there are signs that some of the fish may be beginning to adapt and eat the zebra mussels. Nature, as always, adapts and is trying to fight back. But have we invested in studies to understand it, to help it along? No, not a thing. Typical of the way we treat the loch, even when there might be hope, we fail to follow it up. Consequences reach deep into the community. Eel fishers have lost up to 60% of their income since 2023. Generations of tradition, families that have lived by the loch for centuries, are being destroyed. Tourism and recreation are collapsing as visitors turn away from the stink and the sight. Caravan parks that were once full all summer long are now empty. And even though NI Water insists that the drinking water remains safe, the trust has gone. People are asking themselves if the water coming out of their taps is really clean, and many have switched permanently to bottled water. And while all this unfolds, the government has been fragmented and weak. We had dozens of agencies with small slices of responsibility, and none of them were working together. And thankfully now that's starting to change. We had a 37-point action plan on it last year, but only 14 of those measures have been implemented. And let's not forget, the loch itself isn't even publicly owned. Ireland's most important natural resource is held by a private English lord. So how can you ever protect something that is treated as private property rather than the heart of our landscape and identity? We need a big structural change, an independent environmental protection agency with real enforcement powers separate from political interference. We also need binding legal targets for environmental recovery, the same way we have climate targets, so that politicians can't backslide or drag their feet. And yes, we need farmers at the heart of the solution. They are the stewards of our land. Their concerns about cost and practicality are real and must be heard. But pollution is destroying our rivers, our lakes, and our loch, and action is overdue. Stopping consultations like NAP was a scandal and a cowardly attempt to avoid difficult questions. And what we need is partnership, an agriculture water quality working group, proper advice and education, financial incentives and support to help farmers make the transition to sustainable practices. In the south, farmers have access to grant funding, to water quality advisors, to real support for low emission slurry spreading and storage. That's the model we should mirror. Support the farmers, yes, but also protect our waters. Both can and must be done. The riverways that flow into the loch are long. Some even come from the Republic of Ireland. This isn't a local issue. It's a national issue. And as I hope you agree, it's also an international scandal. The science is clear. Even if we acted today and did everything right, it will take at least 20 years for the loch to recover to a respectable level. And some studies suggest 40 years before phosphorus levels could fall by 75%. But if we take 20, by that time I'll be in my late 50s, my children will be in their early 20s. But this is the real truth. My daughters, and any sons or daughters that might come after, will never know the summers that I knew. The flies, the swims, the games on the shore. We will have at least 3 generations of Lough Shore families that won't be able to pass those stories along. But maybe, just maybe, my grandchildren could, and that is what is at stake. Lough Neagh has been there for thousands of years. It was there long before us, and it will be there long after we're gone. The question is, what state will we leave it in? We don't own the loch. We are only the caretakers. Our duty is to pass it on in good health and not as a septic tank. This is our moment of responsibility. The loch gave us life, memories, and tradition. It has shaped our lives, our mythology, our storytelling, and our music. And now it needs us. And without Lough Neagh, we lose more than water, our fish, our flies. We lose a part of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malachy, for that passionate talk. So now we're going to flip to the other hemisphere here. So our next speaker is Gabriel Belgalis. He's a ranger and project lead with the Department of Conservation based in Teanu. So he's going to reflect on the environmental and cultural significance of Milford Sound and some of the challenges that they're facing at one of New Zealand's most iconic sites.
Yeah, harimai, welcome. Kia ora koutou, kia ora koutou, kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Gabriel Vilgelis Takoina, no te papa atawhai o te Aotearoa. Ko kaiarahi kaupapa o Haupauri me manahuri. As David said, my name is Gabriel Vilgelis. I'm from the Department of Conservation in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I am the Ranger Project lead with a focus on Milford Sound Pio Tahi, based with the community team here in Tiano. So big thanks to Raymond, David, and Sinead, and everybody else for organizing this and leading this important kaupapa. And thanks for letting me speak today, tonight for me, about this iconic piece of New Zealand's history. So what is and where is Pio Tahi? Milford Sound Pio Tahi is a fjord located in the north of Te Rua o Te Moko, which is Fiordland National Park, which was made a national park in 1952. It covers just over 12,500 square kilometers and makes up a significant portion of Te Wāhi Pounamu, Southwest New Zealand, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. That area is the largest and least modified area of New Zealand's natural ecosystems, and as such remains one of the best modern examples of ancient taxa of Gondwana. Pio Tahi has a long history of cultural significance for Aotearoa, originally settled by Waitaha and subsequently Katimoemoe and Ngaitahu. Local kōrero is that Pio Tahi was the final masterpiece of the Atua Tute Raki Whanua when he carved the fjords into the coastline of Fiordland. Pio Tahi is also renowned for its presence of tangiwai, which is a form of pounamu. It's a bowenite nephrite, which is a tonga treasure for the people of New Zealand. Up until the late 1800s, the only way to access Milford Sound was through the Tasman Sea, but in 1888, Omanui or McKinnon Pass was refound by Quentin McKinnon out from Tiano and linked to traditional pathways used by Ngaitahu to link between Milford Sound and Bligh Sound to the southwest. This route would become the Milford Track, which is one of the Great Walks and is used by around 14,000 hikers annually, which takes us to some of the challenges that we face as the government department responsible for Milford Sound Pio Tahi. So Rudyard Kipling described Milford Sound as the eighth wonder of the world, and he certainly isn't alone in his view. Pio Tahi has previously been called the world's top travel destination and is acclaimed by some to be New Zealand's most famous tourist destination, receiving over 1 million visitors annually. There's a single road in and out, 115 kilometers winding through the front country farms that skirt the edges of the national park and up and across the divide and through the Homer Tunnel before descending into Milford Sound. This number of visitors has been steadily increasing since the opening of the Homer Tunnel in 1953 and shows little signs of decreasing, which raises the demands for visitor amenities and experiences along this corridor and at the end in Pio Tahi. There's several tourism companies looking to meet these demands, and they operate along the road and within Milford Sound itself, providing tours, guided trips, cruises, scenic flights, and accommodation. And these commercial entities are all operating under a system of concessions and permissions, which are managed by the department through various statutory frameworks that filter through both national and localized permissions and community teams. A small village of around 100 to 200 seasonal residents working in these tourism ventures is established on the edge of the Sound, next to the mouth of the Clito River. Any given day, there can be somewhere between 1,500 and 4,000 visitors. And the road, which also represents a world-class experience, is the only paved section of Fiordland National Park. And it is administered by an alliance between the department, New Zealand Transport Authority, and Downers New Zealand. And there's huge challenges in keeping this road open for passage. Large sections pass through old growth beech forests, which often see trees falling onto the road, and the alpine sections present an avalanche risk from June to October. Fiordland is a highly dynamic environment where tightly packed ridges and mountains present sheer cliffs carved by ancient glaciers that turn to vertical rivers when it rains, which it does for some 2/3 of the year. Milford Sound Pio Tahi receives an annual rainfall of around 6 meters, making it the wettest inhabited place on Earth. An unsurprising result of this is an increased flood risk for the rivers that have formed at the base of these peaks. And indeed, the Clydach River has flooded multiple times, including most recently in 2020, when over 1 meter of rain fell in a 60-hour period, leading to a state of emergency and the evacuation of around 400 people from Milford Sound. New Zealand itself is also a dynamic country, straddling the Pacific and Indo-Australian plate boundaries, which converged to lift the Southern Alps over the past 12 million years to the now towering spine running along the entire length of the South Island. This dynamism presents as earthquakes and geothermal activity throughout New Zealand, with an interwoven series of faults running through much of the country. The tectonic plate boundaries form the Macquarie Fault Zone and the Poissiger Trench, which rise to meet New Zealand around 10 kilometers north of Milford Sound, which forms the Alpine Fault. And the Alpine Fault has ruptured more than 4 times in the last 900 years, occurring on an average of around 300 years. And the last rupture occurred in 1717. With current science, there's a 75% chance that it will rupture again in the next 50 years. Earthquakes are known to trigger landslides and slips and often tsunami. Milford Sound, which can be characterized by its sheer cliff walls and narrow valleys, is incredibly prone to landslides, slips, and rockfall. Geological deposits at the bottom of the sound record a series of at least 17 large landslides, which would have the capable size of triggering a tsunami localized to Milford Sound, the results of which would be catastrophic for any structures and people within the sound at the time. In conjunction with keeping visitors safe, there's challenges around managing environmental and ecological effects of human activity within the sound. The amount of annual visitors isn't without impact, and this can be seen in the changed landscape over time within the sound itself, where there was initially 3 huts that it has now turned into a visitor terminal with wharves for ships, an airport, a lodge, a veritable village of tourism operators, all connected up to a sealed road and tunnel, altering the physical landscapes of Fiordland and Tiana, from Tiana to Milford. Historically, building standards and materials varied greatly, with lots of hazardous substances used over the years, asbestos, lead, other nasties. And when the life of these constructions was over, they were interred in a local landfill, which was positioned on one of the few other flat pieces of land within the valley, close to the confluence of the Tutoko River with the Clydach River. It's about 2 kilometers or so up the valley from Milford Sound itself. With a greater understanding now of how runoff and groundwaters move, this proximate landfill presented a huge risk for an influx of hazardous materials and contaminants into Milford Sound, which is a marine reserve home to a unique black coral species, as well as fur seal colonies, Fiordland crested penguins, dolphins, sharks, and whales, among other deepwater denizens. We covered how there's only one road in and out, and this road goes through some sensitive ecosystems which have the potential to be adversely affected by this increase in human activity. The subalpine to alpine zones contain some unique species, such as the Mount Cook buttercup, which only occurs within that sort of 700 to 1500 meter elevation range. And indeed, some critically endangered species, such as the Akawakapaka skink, which is shown here, only lives within a few hectares of the area around Homer Saddle, where the Homer Tunnel is positioned. Another affected species by this increased flux is the kea, which is the world's only alpine parrot. Their current population has declined to between 3,000 and 5,000 individuals. And like many other parrots, they're inquisitive and friendly birds. They're social and likely to approach humans out of curiosity, which in turn often leads to humans offering them a bit of their lunch. This tends to encourage kea back and seek out areas of human activity within their ranges, which includes Milford Road and Milford Sound. This leads to kea deaths from car strikes, elevated lead poisoning from wheel weights and other construction materials used in early buildings that were constructed along the road and within the village. Like many other flora and fauna present in New Zealand, both the Awakapaka skinks and kea are subject to predation from introduced mammalian pests and predators, these being most predominantly mice, rats, brush-tailed possums, stoats, weasels, and feral cats. Deer, goats, and pigs were also introduced in the early European settlement of New Zealand to provide food sources and hunting opportunities to settlers. And without any predators, their population numbers have grown immensely. They cause a great deal of devastation to the fragile and sensitive ecosystems of Fjordland and the alpine zones. However, currently there are no pigs or deer on the western side of the Homer Tunnel. There are, however, chamois, an alpine goat which was introduced from the European Alps, which poses a large threat to Mount Cook buttercups. So some of our responses as the department managing this, a large portion of DOC's funding comes from an international visitor levy, which is a levy charged to most international visitors to New Zealand aimed at addressing challenges in the tourism and conservation systems. Recently, a almost $15 million portion of this levy has been directed towards Milford Sound over the next 3 years. And this is going to aim at increasing visitor safety, upgrading facilities and amenities, cleaning up the Little Tahiti landfill, and improving the Clodo River flood protection. There's a working group and emergency response plans in place for tsunami and flooding events, and the Clodo River flood protection scheme has recently been upgraded at the start of this year with large amounts of gravel extracted from near the mouth and a new sort of riprap wall put along it. The Little Tahiti landfill was excavated over a 6-week period from mid-May to the end of June. Over 130 tons of contaminated material were dug out and put into line trucks, which then traveled back up the road to a secure site much further inland and away from any known aquifers or rivers. The landfill was backfilled with locally sourced stone from the foot of Barron Peak just across the road. And this area is being replanted with native vegetation, particularly Muhlenbeckia axillaris, which is a food plant for another endangered species in the area, which is the Milford Sound copper butterfly. The site has been renamed Paraora by Ngaitahu, and a blessing of the site is going to occur in early October. In addition to this continuation of existing concession, and in addition to this is a continuation of the existing concessions and permission systems which guide how tour companies operate within the national park, and the Fjordland National Park Management Plan, which provides the legal framework on how the park will be managed, is to be rewritten as it's woefully out of date. So in closing, I'd like to sort of say that Milford Sound is an iconic part of New Zealand, and it's a dynamic environment, and reflected in that is the dynamic approach that we have to take as the Katiaki, or guardians, so that we can ensure that it can be enjoyed and protected for generations to come. I'll leave you with this quote from William McCutcheon's Camp Life in Fjordland: "Art thou born to greatness and power among men? Go measure thy might with the avalanche, thy life with the ceaseless river, and thy power with echoing falls." Ngā mihi nui, and thank you all for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gabrielle. So next, now we have Craig Pauling, supported by Tim Davey, who are going to be representing the Te Waiora Co-Governance Group, which is co-governed between Environment Canterbury and Manu Whenua. I'll pass it over to you now, Craig. Thank you very much.
Ai hoki mai koe ki te pā o Ngāti Muki e tū ana ki te taho o te kahu taipauri o te Waihora moana o te kiti ika a rā kaihautu e rere ana ki a tātou e. Te tuna kohaka whāriki o te piharau ripo o te inaka moika o te mohoao, tai tumu, tai pari, ka waia maha nui ki te paupau o te raki hauiha. Pupu mai ka haua tāwhiri mā te whakapuria te awa hoko o te whenua Pākihi Waitaha e a tihei Mauriora. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou i tēnei pō i tō tātou kōrero e pāna nā taonga, nā wai, nā wāhi a tāhua o te ao, tēnei te mihi kia koutou ko Craig Pauling taku ingoa. So kia ora koutou, my name's Craig. I'm the chair of our regional council, the Canterbury Regional Council here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and proud to be here tonight to tell a story about Te Waihora, Lake Ellesmere, Te Kitika Arakai Hotu, special taonga for us here in Canterbury, in Waitaha. And I just started with a tau parapara from my people, ko Ngaitahu au, so I'm a Ngaitahu person. I'm also English, Scottish and Welsh, so kia ora whānau over there. And yeah, proud to be here, like I said, on behalf of my people and our council. Started with the tau parapara, which just outlined that, talked about our village at Ngāti Muki on the shores of our waters there at Te Waihora. the fish basket of Rakohotu, one of our tupuna, the gathering place of the eel, the floor mat of the lamprey, the spawning swamps of the whitebait, the sleeping ground of the black flounder, and yeah, that's pretty much the story of our great taonga there. So if we go on, Tim, if you can move the slide forward, thank you. So why does Te Waihora matter? I don't have a map, sorry, but if you know, if we talk about Gabriel's work just before, he's down the bottom of Te Waiponamu, the South Island. If you head back up the island, and you'll see the little peninsula that sticks out on the east coast near Otautahi Christchurch. Te Waihora sits just below that peninsula that sticks out. It's about the size of Christchurch. Actually, it's about the same size as Christchurch in that peninsula, 197 square kilometres, slightly smaller than Lough Neagh, mind you, and it's a shallow coastal lagoon. It's not a lake, although our European ancestors called it a lake, but to our Māori people, it was a hapua, a coastal lagoon, and still is. And it's very shallow. It's only 1.4 metres average and 3 metres at its deepest point, so pretty shallow. Although that's in today's term, obviously one of the issues with Te Waihora is that it has been mechanically opened for about 150 years, and so it's kept at an artificially low level. In the past, it could get as high as 3 or 4 metres above sea level. At the moment, we manage it at around 1 metre above sea level. And why is that? Mainly to protect farmland and land that was drained from the former swamps that used to surround, and the former wetlands, sorry, that used to surround Te Waihora in the past, almost up to the city of Christchurch as we know it today. But those lands were drained for agricultural land use and are still in largely agricultural land use. It's internationally significant for especially migrating birds and wading birds. Over 40,000 birds live out there and have their homes there, nest there, come there. That's culturally significant to my people, of course, of Ngaitahu. The lake bed itself was returned to our people as part of the Ngaitahu Claim Settlement Act in 1998, which preceded our White Treaty of Waitangi claim that was laid in 1986, but also our traditional claim that was first laid down to Queen Victoria in 1849, 1 year after the Kemp's purchase of Canterbury, which is a crown sale purchase between our people and Queen Victoria in 1848. But just before that was the Treaty of Waitangi, you might have heard of as well, which was 1840. But our people started writing to Queen Victoria 1 year later to say that some of the problems, especially with Te Waihora, were already starting to happen and the promises weren't being kept. But as you can see on the slide, it's ecologically significant, of course, for a number of birds, like I said, and also for its fisheries, similar to Lough Neagh, tuna or eels, pārtiki, flounders, and aua, the yellow-eyed mullet. Tuna and pārtiki in particular are commercial fisheries as well. It's the single largest commercial eel fishery in New Zealand, but also a very important customary fishery. Tim, if you could move on, that'd be great. Obviously, it's got a lot of challenges similar to Lough Neagh that we've heard, really hauntingly similar stories, to be honest. It's one of our most degraded lakes or water bodies. It sits about third or fourth on the list, goes up and down a little bit. And that's particularly associated with, like I said, the drainage of those surrounding wetlands in the past, the influx of agricultural land use, but also urban land use as well. We have the city of Christchurch from one tributary of the Huritini River, and then we have other tributaries that flow from other big townships now as well. So sewage was an issue in the past. Our people have worked really hard to stop those direct sewage discharges, so they no longer happen into the lake, but they did happen for a long time. As well as, like I said, just agricultural runoff is a massive problem. And for the last 20 years, we've had a large dairy farming boom in our region, especially in the Selwyn Waihora zone, whereas before that, there was a lot more sheep and mixed cropping farms in that catchment, but it's changed a lot. And so with that additional nutrient input that goes into the dairy farming system, that's flown right through the gravel landscape, which is the Canterbury Plains, and flows out into Te Waihora, which is the sink at the bottom of that system. Obviously, that's resulted in water quality issues. It's hyper-eutrophic, which is the same as Lough Neagh. But I've heard stories even in the 1970s, as recently as the 1970s, that and I was born in 1976, so just a bit ahead of my time, but my aunties and uncles would tell me that the near shore habitat of the lake was clear. And so that's no longer the case. It's pretty similar to this photos, and you'll see some more coming up. We get algal blooms as well. We have legacy phosphorus embedded in the bed of that lake, which was a nice present we got from the Crown when the land was returned to us. We're trying to be positive about that going forward. Habitat loss, of course, and like I said, the change of that wetland habitat that really was a buffer for the lake in the past. Tim, we can carry on. But a special thing, I suppose, that's happened because of that return of the lake bed in 1998. We've also, before the co-governance agreement was put in place, there was another co-governance model that was started immediately after the settlement between the Department of Conservation, who Gabrielle works for, Te Papa Atawhai, and Te Runanga o Ngāitahu, the iwi authority, to create a joint management plan that was dictated by the treaty settlement. And we developed that in 2002. It still stands as the joint management plan for the Department of Conservation land surrounding the lake or the lagoon and the Ngāitahu lake bed. So that was done in 2002. But go back to the other bit, Tim, in terms of the co-governance approach. So after we'd been through that process with the joint management plan, we came to the regional council. I was not on the regional council at that time. I was working for my people and representing our management board that we had for the lake bed. And we approached the regional council and came to a joint agreement to create a co-governance arrangement over not only the Te Waihora, but its whole catchment, seeming that the regional council had that responsibility. So we signed that agreement in 2012. The partners were the iwi, the 6 hapu organisations, and the regional council, but also over time we've brought in the Selwyn District Council, the Christchurch City Council, and the Department of Conservation into that co-governance agreement over the next 12 and 13 years. So that's a long-term agreement, as well as a long-term strategy, restoration and cultural ecological restoration strategy called Whakaora Te Waihora, and I've sent the link to that website so you can see that. You can carry on, Tim. Thank you. So like I said, the co-governance agreement, but also the Whakaora Te Waihora restoration program, which combined some resources from the government, $6 million, along with $6 million from the partners at that time, and that program was our first phase. We were hoping to get a further phase of that money after the completion of that first 5 years of work, but that hasn't happened from the Crown so far. So in the meantime, we've been doing other initiatives, which I'll get to shortly. But this slide just shows you some of the other planning documents and strategies we've worked on over time, including the Te Waihora Water Conservation Order, which is a statute we have under the Resource Management Act, a regulation we have. And that provides for the lake opening somewhat. We have a lake opening resource consent as well. That's a joint consent between Ngāitahu and the Regional Council. And there it is there. That's a shot of where the Te Waihora is open to the sea. You can see the discoloration and the change of the different water flowing from Te Waihora in the background and into the ocean at Te Mahanui or the Kaitoriti Spit, the shoreline there of the Canterbury coast. And so, like I said, that's been artificially open for a long time. And so the water conservation order that we did allowed us to recognise that the fishery was outstanding in a national sense, and also the wetland complex was outstanding. so that when we open the lake, those values can be taken into account. Because before that, lake openings were really predominantly for land drainage purposes and protecting the farmland, whereas now the fishery has to be taken into account. And often lake opening used to occur only when the farmland needed protecting, which was in winter, versus when the fish need the lake open, which is in autumn and spring. So over the last 10 years, we've been working really hard to try to get a better alignment between the values of the fishery and the environment and the people. Other initiatives we've worked on, we did the land and water plan as well, which was on the previous slide, but we can leave it on this one, Tim, that's fine. Oh no, yeah, it's all good. The land and water plan was a significant piece of work that our council did with our community, and that set our bottom line for nutrient input in the whole catchment, and asked for reductions with our farming community through consents for farming and bringing in farm environmental plans. And so that's something that's happened in the background. And so to try to help Te Waihora, we also created a cultural management, lake cultural management area around the lake. So any farm or property within inside that area had additional conditions put on their land use. But some of the more positive restoration work we've done in the meantime has been under the Whakaora Te Waihora plan. And we've been quite busy constructing or reconstructing wetlands. So I told you about the former wetlands that used to be around the lake. So one of the strategies is actually putting some of them back into the landscape. And the most recent project we've done is with one of our marae, my marae at Taumutu. And so the Whakaora Te Waikiki Wai project has been partial wetland, constructed wetland along with stream and habitat enhancement. We've also got the Weed Strike Force project that is a massive project around the lakeshore led by the Department of Conservation, getting rid of willows that have infested the once open wetlands around the lake. And if you go to the next one, Tim, we've also, in the past, we did the Ahuriri wetland, which was another constructed wetland, which you can see in the bottom of that image there. We took a former 2-hectare paddock, but used to be within a complex of another 171 hectare wetland that was drained in the past, and we recreated or restored a 2-hectare part of that wetland. And the goal of that was to try to treat the water from one of the incoming tributaries to see if we could improve that water quality, as well as created habitat. And the bird you see in the picture is a kautuku or a mātuku, and that's a bittern. And within a year of creating that wetland from what was a paddock, we had that rare and endangered bird already breeding and living in that habitat. So it shows that you can make a massive change really quickly. You can go to the next one, Tim, if you like. And actually, the other thing that we've had happen in Canterbury, which is a really good news story, is our farming community, our local community, our landowners, the runanga, our marae, and the regional council and district councils have all been working together, and the Department of Conservation, to do massive amounts of restoration work within our whole catchment. And that's demonstrated by this image you can see here, which is just different environmental and community groups, along with our agency actions that all provide habitat and ecological restoration within the lake. So that's been a massive achievement for the last 20 years of work within the community. But in saying that, we've still got a long way to go, because Te Waihora is still hypertrophic. Like I said earlier on, it's still suffering from a lack of buffer, I believe. And so one of the projects that the co-governance group is really a flagship project for our future is to create a Te Waihora wetland Mahinga Kai Park, and to recreate some of the wetland buffer in time. That would require a massive shift in thinking in terms of how to acquire and purchase land that's currently farmed and is quite valuable. But that would be something we'd need to confront over time. But that's a long-term goal for us on the co-governance group. And I think I've probably talked enough. But just wanted to say also that, yeah, listening to you, Malachi and Sarah, in terms of Lough Neagh, like I said, yeah, hauntingly familiar. And today at our regional council, we actually declared a nitrate emergency for our region. It only just got through the vote, but we've already been told off by our central government already, to be honest, for doing that. But it just highlights that there is a need in our community and in an awareness to actually act now. And I heard Malachi's, passionate plea. We're in that same situation, so that's only by working together with our farming community, with our wider community, with our Papatipi Runanga, our mana whenua, and our government agencies, that we're going to be able to make a difference. And actually, you said 20 years. I'd actually be comfortable with 200 years, to be honest, to return our lake and our environment to what it is. But I'll take 20 years as well. But kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Craig. And Ami. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm mindful that we do have some questions that we want to whip through. I will ask if it is possible that the panelists could perhaps stay on for a little while longer just to answer a few questions. But I think, Raymond, just a quick reflection from yourself on Uluru, please. And I will emphasize quick if at all possible.
Okay, look, I mean, obviously we're talking very much water here, but Uluru, the main things that have happened with Uluru is that even the name changed. So that's been very significant. It was always Ayers Rock. It's now established as Uluru. There's a governing body which is predominantly managed by the indigenous population who have an affection and a deep cultural connection with Uluru. So that's a major step forward. The agencies seem to be working together. And then the other significant thing has been the ban on climbing Uluru, because this was causing a lot of stress. So you can see Uluru, but you need to be in a hot air balloon, or you can walk around the bottom. So there's been some significant things, but the main one is that somebody is minding it and they have an affection for the icon. And it's the Nangu indigenous people who have the affection for it and minding. So that's really all I wanted to say. Referring back to obviously Malachi there, it's got to be the local people with an affection, or a dukas is the Irish word we have, with a real deep connection that should be driving this. So that's all I wanted to say.
I'd like to thank all of our speakers and to everyone who stuck around and joined us today at a whole variety of different times. It's been a privilege to bring Lough Neagh to the international scene, and also to introduce different parts of the world to the people at home as well. So there are certainly some positives to take away from this, and I hope that's the overwhelming feeling you have as we leave today. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your morning, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll catch you next time.